Study destruction from sea level rise in California could exceed worst wildfires and earthquakes. Los Angeles. In the most extensive study to date on sea level rise in California, researchers say damages by the end of the century could be far more devastating than the worst earthquakes and wildfires in state history. A team of U.S. Geological Survey scientists concluded that even a modest amount of sea level rise, often dismissed as a creeping, slow-moving disaster, could overwhelm communities when a storm hits at the same time. The study combines sea level rise and storms for the first time, as well as wave action, cliff erosion, beach loss, and other coastal threats across California. These factors the results are sobering. More than 500,000, and at a time when marshes are drowning, cliffs eroding, beaches disappearing, and severe storms likely to become more frequent, scientists say even a small shift in sea level rise could launch a new range of extremes that Californians would have to confront every single year. The stakes are high for the millions of Californians who have chosen to build and live along the edge of the Pacific. In recent months, in Imperial Beach, large waves coupled with some of the highest tides of the season sent water crashing past seawalls, flooding roads and garages and much of the Tijuana River estuary. From San Diego, the new USGS study underscores how these events will continue along the coast and amplify each other as the sea continues to rise. Translating sea level rise into economic risk and property loss advances a tricky issue that many communities have been reluctant to confront. Blockbusters, the latest national climate assessment, a major scientific report by 13 federal agencies, concluded $1 trillion in coastal real estate is threatened by rising sea levels, storm surges, and high tide flooding exacerbated by climate change. Scientists. In the USGS study, published Wednesday in the Nature journal Scientific Reports, researchers brought together a number of models that examined wave action, tides, coastal erosion and flooding in California under sea level rise scenarios ranging from 0 to 2 meters (6.6 feet). On top of these, they then overlaid these integrated projections, known as a dynamic model, with a sophisticated analysis of population data, property assessment values, as well as data from various state agencies, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. Previous efforts to understand potential coastal impacts of climate change have mainly focused on long-term sea level rise, with little consideration of how these other elements could impact the overall flood risk in both the long and short term to a built-out community. Emergency managers and planning officials, in turn, rarely incorporate 100-year storm models in tandem with sea level projections, vastly underestimating a city's risk. For example, with only 0.25 meters of sea level rise projected to occur by about 2040, the number of Californians exposed to flooding might not seem too significant, but at a 100-year storm, and almost 7 times as many people are at risk. All told, with a 2-meter rise by 2100 and a 100-year storm, the projected flood risks could represent 6.3% of the state's GDP, despite only directly affecting 0.3% of the state's land area, according to the study, which did not speculate on future population growth or inflation rates. Researchers noted these projections might even be on the conservative end, given that California policymakers are now considering 3 meters as the higher end of expected sea level rise. They were also surprised by what the model showed with less severe storms. Under the same Katrina, in comparison, cost about $127 billion. And a truly scientists and emergency planners, researchers acknowledged, often focus on extremes: 100-year storms, 1% chance disasters that people can't wrap their minds around. The vulnerabilities from sea level rise combined with storms, both extreme and annual, are particularly evident in areas like Alamitos Bay in Long Beach, Del Mar in San Diego County and other cities built on top of former marshes, near river mouths or in low-lying areas. Entire blocks along the San Francisco Bay, which accounts for 2/3 of the flooding impacts projected for all of California. The cost of building levees, seawalls, and other measures to withstand 2 meters of sea level rise in a 100-year storm could cost as much as $450 billion, twice as much as prior estimates looking at just the cost of defending against sea level rise. In the model, scientists assume that the Bay Area's existing levees and lines of defense are stable and remain in place through 2100, but the same goes for sea walls, berms, rock revetments, and other infrastructure across the state in smaller estuaries, according to the study. There, at the ports, where coastal flooding could impact rail lines and the movement of goods in and out and across the United States, the cost of adaptation is high. The ports of loss. Researchers hope this information will help communities better understand their short-term risks and the long-term consequences of their decisions. More studies and future population trends, economic conditions, human changes to shoreline infrastructure, and greater understanding of El Niño cycles, for example, are all factors that could be added to make more sophisticated models. The choices people make in the coming decades, of course, could also affect these projections. As the Earth then there are the cascading socio-economic impacts that this study doesn't even get into. If they
raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.